We have never been quite sure what to do with the killer whale. We gave it the most frightening name in the ocean, then taught it to wave a fin at children from the side of a pool. We made it the villain of 100 sea stories and the hero of a film about a boy who sets one free. We know its shape without trying. The black and white body, the tall fin standing clear of the water, a creature that somehow manages to look beautiful and frightening at the same time. For most of us, that is the whole of the animal. A brilliant, dangerous thing that lives somewhere between a nightmare and a theme park. And lately, it has been in the news for living up to its name. Off the coast of Spain and Portugal, killer whales have been coming up beneath sailing boats and breaking them. They surface behind a yacht, take hold of the rudder and lean into it until something gives way. Some boats are towed home with their rudders hanging off. A few have gone to the bottom. The videos are everywhere. The dark shapes circling, the panicked crew, the wheel spinning loose in someone's hands, and the story that travels with them is always the same. The whales are angry. After everything we have done to the sea, the orcas are finally fighting back. It's a wonderful story, and it's almost certainly wrong. The people who have spent their lives in small boats near these animals will tell you so, and they say it carefully because they know how it sounds. In more than 700 of these encounters across 5 years, not one person has been hurt. Sit with what that means, coming from this particular animal, a hunter that can run down a tuna in open water, that kills great white sharks and takes only the liver, that can hold a full-grown seal under the surface until it stops moving. If a killer whale meant any harm to the people in these boats, the boats would not come home. They keep coming home. Whatever is happening out there, it is not an attack. So the scientists reached for a different word, and the one they settled on is far stranger than anger. They call it a fad, a fashion. Somewhere around 2020, in the Strait of Gibraltar, a single young whale began leaning on the rudders of passing boats, and the others watched and copied and made the habit their own. The way they might pick up a new call or a new trick for cornering fish and pass it from one to another until the whole family has it. The boats are not a war, they are a craze, a thing the young ones are into this season. And that one fact pushes open a door the name killer whale has held shut for 100 years. An animal that invents a useless fashion and passes it around its family is not running on instinct. It has customs, things it does for no reason at all, except that some other whale it grew up beside started doing them first. The most feared predator in the sea turns out to be the most family-bound mind in it, and the broken rudders of a few Spanish sailing boats are only the first time most of us have happened to look. Out there, just past the harbour wall, something has been keeping a culture of its own, handing it down, playing with it, changing it, the whole time and almost entirely without us. If a quiet hour with one genuinely strange animal sounds like a good way to spend a night, the subscribe button helps a small channel like this one more than almost anything else. And we'd like to know something down in the comments. Have you ever watched an animal do something with no use in it at all? A game or a private habit it simply seemed to have decided on for itself? We read every answer, and some of them stay with us for a long time. Tonight, somewhere in the dark water off Gibraltar, a young orca is doing it again, setting its shoulder against the rudder of a boat it has no reason to touch, in a strait it has crossed its whole life. It isn't angry, and it isn't hungry. When it has had enough, it slips away and goes to find its mother, and the boat is left turning slow circles under the stars. The people aboard will be shaken and grateful, and they'll tell the story for years. Most of them will tell it wrong. The first thing the crew feels is the wheel going soft in their hands. It is a spring evening in the Strait of Gibraltar, the narrow neck of water where the Atlantic crowds into the Mediterranean and the great bluefin tuna pass through in their thousands. Cargo ships stand out on the horizon, stacked and patient, waiting their turn through one of the busiest shipping lanes on Earth. A sailing yacht is making its way across, sails up, the light going from gold to grey. Then the helm, firm and certain a moment ago, turns to nothing in the hands. The wheel spinning loose, the boat no longer answering to it. For a heartbeat it reads as something ordinary. A line snagged on the keel, a freak set of the current. Then comes the first blow, and a second, and a third. It arrives through the soles of the feet before it reaches the ears, a deep, deliberate thud that travels up the rudder post into the hull and the deck and the bones of everyone aboard, the way a fist on a door travels through a house. Whoever is at the helm leans over the rail, and there they are, long dark shapes beneath the surface, the white of their flanks catching the last of the light, rising and turning with a slowness that is somehow worse than speed. Between the blows comes the sound of them breathing, the sharp explosive huff as a black back breaks the surface, then the long hiss of air drawn slowly back in. There are 3 of them, and they are not large. The biggest holds back a little, off to one side, while the 2 smaller ones, young animals only a few years old, work the stern. They take the rudder in their mouths, they set their heads against it and shove, and the whole boat slews round, swinging broadside through the water and then round again, turning in circles it has no way to stop. One of the young whales rolls onto its side as it pushes, and for a moment an eye lifts clear of the water and seems to take in the boat above it, the rail, the row of faces, before it rolls back down to its work. What strikes almost everyone who lives through this afterward is how little fury there is in it. None of the thrashing violence the word attack would lead anyone to expect. The whales take turns, they rest and circle and come back. The whole performance has the patient, absorbed air of something being done properly, of work or of a game with rules only the players know. It can last 10 minutes or stretch well past an hour, and there is, in the end, almost nothing for those aboard to do but the things sailors have learned to do: drop the sails, take their hands off the wheel, and let the boat sit dead in the water. So they wait and call it in over the radio and watch a wild animal take their boat apart with the unhurried care of someone working at a puzzle, until at last the whales lose interest and slip away. By then the rudder may be cracked, or hanging by a single fitting, or simply gone. And then, as suddenly as it began, it is finished. This was no freak event, no single unlucky boat. Some version of that evening has now played out more than 700 times. It began in the spring of 2020, here in the Strait, with a few skippers limping into port telling a story nobody quite believed. In those first months the contact was almost gentle, a nudge, a bump, a curious shove against the hull. The real damage came later, as the behaviour spread and sharpened until rudders were being snapped clean through and, now and then, a boat went down. By 2023 it was happening so often that sailors traded warnings the way they trade weather, and a whole small trade in advice and gadgetry had grown up to meet it. The encounters climbed and peaked, and then, in the strait itself at least, eased off again, even as fresh ones surfaced further north along the Atlantic coast of Spain and Portugal. The pattern keeps shifting, and nobody is sure where it will appear next. And here is the figure the headlines tend to bury. Out of all those hundreds of encounters, the snapped rudders, the tows back into harbour, the frightened voices on the radio, the number of boats actually sent to the bottom is small enough to count on one hand. The number of people killed or maimed or even badly hurt across 5 full years is none at all. Whatever the internet insists on calling an uprising has yet to put a single sailor in hospital. Out on the water, none of that is much comfort. The whales have become part of the planning now, like tides and shipping forecasts. Sailors swap their last known positions in messaging groups that light up all season. pin advice to marina notice boards, and bolt noisemakers to their hulls in the hope of being passed over. The fear is real enough, even if the danger, to anything beyond the steering, mostly is not. And fear, with a few thousand hours of dramatic footage behind it, is how a story sets into a fact. The clips are impossible to look away from. The spinning boat, the dark fins, the human voices climbing toward panic, and the story that rides along with them all but writes itself. The orcas are angry, they are organized, and after a century of our harpoons and our hulls and our engine noise, the most powerful predator in the sea has begun to settle the account. It is a tale with a satisfying shape, and it is easy to see why it traveled the world. It also happens to be a fiction. Consider what these whales actually go for. It is never the hull, where the people are, and never the soft underside of the boat. What they want, every time, is the rudder. The one part that moves, that swings and resists and kicks back when it is leaned on. An animal in a rage does not show that kind of precision or that kind of restraint. This is, after all, a creature that hunts the hunters of the open ocean. A boat full of soft, slow human beings would be the easiest prey it had ever met. It has never once tried. If anything, the rudder seems to be the whole point, and some of the people who study these whales suspect that is exactly the draw, not a target so much as a toy, a big and satisfying thing that pushes back. The most human explanation is also the most popular, that it all began with a grievance. One researcher who has followed these animals for years wondered aloud whether a single female, struck by a hull perhaps, or dragged by a fishing line, might have started it, striking back at the thing that hurt her and passing the lesson to her young. It is a powerful idea and an easy one to feel. It is also unproven and probably unprovable. No one ever recorded that founding wound. It has been built backward out of the behavior itself because revenge is a motive we know from the inside and reach for first. The whales have offered no such confession. When a panel of researchers gathered in 2024 to make sense of the whole affair, the word they kept circling was not vengeance, but something gentler and much harder to account for. What they were watching, they decided, looked less like an attack than like play, a craze among the young animals, taken up and handed along and elaborated for no reason beyond the pleasure of the thing. Which sets the real questions back down exactly where they were found. Why the rudder? Why the spring of 2020? Why this one small band of whales in this one stretch of sea, when the thousands of orcas everywhere else have never laid a tooth on a boat? To those, the honest answer is that no one yet knows. What we can say is that they did not come here for us. They came, as they come every spring, for the bluefin tuna pouring through the strait, and somewhere inside that old and serious business of hunting, a handful of them have taken to playing with our boats. Out in the strait, the evening has all but gone. The last of the whales rolls under and is simply not there any longer, the water drawing smooth over the place it had been, the boat left wallowing in a quiet that feels enormous after all that noise. They have left the way they always leave, completely and without a word of explanation. That vanishing is the part worth carrying forward, because it may be the most orca thing about the whole story. These animals seize on something out of nowhere, the whole family at once, carry it for a season because it suits them, and then one day set it down and let it dissolve as though it had never been. We know this because they have done it before. Not here, and not with boats, but off a coast on the far side of the world, where the orcas once took up a fashion so useless and so strange that the scientists are still puzzling over it 40 years on. In the summer of 1987, off the coast of Washington state, a killer whale began wearing a dead fish on her head. She was one of the salmon hunters of Puget Sound, a sleek black and white animal in a close-knit community of them, and one ordinary afternoon she rose to the surface with a whole dead salmon balanced flat on top of her head, not gripped in her mouth, not being eaten, but simply carried there like a hat. The scientists watching had been following these particular whales for years, long enough to know every animal by the shape of its fin and the grey saddle patch behind it, and they had never seen anything remotely like it. There was no sense in it that anyone could find. The female was not hungry. The sound was thick with salmon that season, far more than the whales could eat, and she made no move to feed on the fish she carried. She swam with it, dived, came back up, and either it was still in place or she had collected another. She had, for reasons known only to her, decided to wear a salmon. The truly strange part is that it did not stay hers. Within a few weeks, she had company. First, the other whales of her own family, and then animals from 2 neighboring pods who had no particular reason to copy her at all. Young and old, mothers and grown sons, up and down the inland sea, killer whales were cruising about with dead fish balanced on their heads, as though this were simply what one did now. The thing had jumped sideways through the population, not handed down from mother to calf the way a hunting skill is, but passed between unrelated animals on the strength of nothing but example. Nothing in their biology moves that fast or that sideways. This was closer to an idea catching on, a thing that spread because the others were doing it, and for no other reason in the world, and no one, then or since, has worked out what the idea was. The salmon hat caught no fish and frightened off no rival. It taught the calves nothing and won the wearer no rank that could be measured. By every standard a biologist can bring to it, the behavior was useless, and that uselessness is the whole marvel of it. These are inventive animals at the best of times. They drape themselves in ribbons of kelp, nose jellyfish around for the feel of the thing, and greet one another with long formal gatherings when 2 families meet in open water. But the salmon hat went past play into something stranger and purer. A useful habit might be instinct, or a clever trick worked out alone. Only a pointless one, spreading from animal to animal, gives the game away. Because the single reason to wear a fish at all is that the others are wearing one too. That is not biology at work, it is belonging. Then, the following summer, it ended. The salmon ran into the sound as they always had, and not one whale thought to wear a single one. The fashion was simply over, abandoned all at once and without explanation, the way these things go. The people who give their lives to studying these whales have a word for the whole arc of it, and it is a faintly ridiculous one to attach to a 5-ton predator, a fad. A behavior that surfaces in one individual, runs through a community by pure social copying, peaks, and then burns itself out, leaving nothing behind but the notes of whoever was lucky enough to witness it. The salmon hat is the cleanest example anyone has ever recorded, and it is precisely the word that a different set of scientists, decades later and most of an ocean away, reached for as they watched young whales turning sailing boats in slow circles off the coast of Spain. Confronted with the broken rudders, they were not dreaming up some exotic new theory of revenge. They were recognizing an old acquaintance. If any of this is beginning to feel familiar, it should. We are the other great fad-making animal on Earth, forever taking up words and clothes and gestures for no reason beyond the fact that the people around us have, and dropping them just as fast when the mood shifts. The orcas of Puget Sound simply did it with fish, all of which would make a tidy story had it ended in 1988. It did not. In the closing weeks of 2024, 37 years after the fashion had supposedly died for good, the salmon hats came back. In the same grey inland waters, whales surfaced once again with fish balanced on their heads, and the photographs travelled the world a second time. 37 years is the better part of a killer whale's life. The great majority of the animals taking up the hat in 2024 had not been born when it last swept through, which leaves only two explanations. Either the habit had been carried in silence across nearly 4 decades by the few surviving elders who had worn it as youngsters and never quite let it go, or it had been struck up again out of nothing, reinvented whole by whales with no possible way of knowing it had ever existed. Take the two of them in turn. A memory held quietly in a mind for 37 years, or the very same useless spark struck cleanly a second time by animals beginning from nothing. Neither is an ordinary thing for a mind to do. The researchers cannot say which. These are animals with fashions. They take things up and they set things down. They have crazes and revivals and trends that run through the family and across the generations for reasons no one has ever managed to name. That is not instinct. Instinct does not go out of style and come back into it. It is the work of a creature with a culture, a shared, invented, handed-down way of being alive, deep enough to keep something as gloriously useless as a hat made of fish alive across 37 years of open ocean. Out in the dark water of the Sound tonight, a whale that had not yet been born in 1987 may be swimming with a salmon balanced on its head, reviving a craze from a summer it never saw, inside a culture old enough to have made and lost and remade such things more times than anyone will ever count, long before there was a single person on the shore with a notebook to write any of it down. There is a small mistake folded into the name killer whale, and a much larger one hidden beneath it. Both have been with us so long that we have stopped noticing either. The small mistake is the easy one to clear up. A killer whale is not a whale. It is a dolphin, the largest dolphin in the world, but a dolphin to the bone, far closer kin to the grinning, leaping charmer of the aquarium than to the great whales it swims among. Picture that for a moment. The same family tree that gives us the friendly bottlenose also produced a 10-meter, 6-ton predator formidable enough to attack the largest animals that have ever lived. That is where the killer came from. It seems to have begun with sailors who watched these dolphins running down whales many times their size and called them whale killers. And somewhere in the crossing into English, the words turned over, and the killer of whales quietly became the killer whale. And that older name is a slander of a particular kind. For all their power, and there is very little in the sea they cannot bring down given numbers and patience, no wild killer whale has ever been recorded killing a human being. Not one. In all the centuries we have shared the water and kept the records. The most formidable predator in the ocean, an animal that could end any of us between one breath and the next, has looked human beings over for thousands of years and never once treated us as prey. The name, it turns out, has things backwards. The danger in that water was never the one we imagined, but the dolphin and the slander are only the surface of it. The deeper mistake, the one that ought to unsettle anyone who feels they know this animal, is that killer whale is not the name of a single creature at all. It is a name we have draped over several. Go to the Salish Sea, the maze of cold green channels between Washington State and Canada on a long summer evening, and two of them can sometimes be found in the same water at once. The first is a large family, spread loosely across half a mile, and the water around it is full of sound. Long falling whistles, the creak and squeal of pulsed calls, the rapid tick of echolocation sweeping the dark for salmon. They are talkers, keeping up an almost constant conversation as they fish, threaded across the whole scattered family, because the salmon they hunt can barely hear them, and so there is no cost to the noise and every reason to stay in touch. These are the residents in the language of the people who study them, the stay-at-homes haunting the same channels year after year, living on fish. The second group moves through the very same water like a held breath. 3 or 4 dark shapes traveling close together and not a sound between them. No whistle, no call, no click. They are hunting, and what they are hunting is a seal, hauled out and dozing on a rock at the channel's edge, and a seal has ears. Here is the terrible elegance of it. The seal can hear the talkative family perfectly well off in the distance, and has no cause to fear them, because their kind has never harmed a seal in all its history. What it cannot hear is the silence gliding toward it from the other direction. These are the hunters, the wanderers, ranging wide and surfacing without warning, living on warm blood. The two groups pass within a mile of one another, and nothing happens. The fish-eaters spare the seal not a glance. It has never been food to them. The hunters ignore the salmon thick in the water all around them. Fish is not food to them. No greeting passes between the families, no challenge, no flicker of curiosity. They give each other a wide and practiced berth, two animals sharing one channel with nothing whatever to say. And they have been doing precisely this, in these same waters, for something close to 300,000 years. For roughly as long as there have been human beings on Earth, these two kinds of killer whale have lived side by side and never interbred, never joined, never so much as borrowed one another's calls. In everything but the shape of their bodies, they are as different as a wolf is from a house cat, in what they eat, how they hunt, the company they keep, and the sounds they make. And yet, to anything but a trained eye, they are simply the same animal. Nor is it only these two. Around the world, the orca arrives in many kinds, the ones that trail the tuna through the Strait of Gibraltar, the ones that herd herring in the northern fjords, the ones that work the Antarctic ice for seals, the shark hunters, the whale hunters, each with its own diet, its own dialect, its own settled certainty about what a killer whale eats and how it lives. The single animal we name so confidently is really a scattering of separate cultures, each dressed in the same black and white skin. And none of it is written in their blood. A calf born to the fish-eaters and a calf born to the hunters begin life all but identical and grow into animals as different as any two predators on Earth. One of them certain that salmon is food and seals are merely neighbors, the other certain of the exact reverse. Neither was born knowing. Each was raised into it, taught over long years by a mother and a family who had been taught the same way before them. In 2024, a team of scientists who had spent their careers with the two kinds of the Pacific Northwest set out a formal case that they are not varieties of one species at all, but two, genuinely separate species. The proposal has not been fully settled, for now the pair sit in a kind of taxonomic waiting room, recognized as deeply different but not yet officially divided. Still, that the argument can be made in earnest is the staggering part, because nothing physical holds these animals apart. They are separated by no mountain range and no barrier of open ocean. They swim through the same channels on the same afternoons and decline to become one people. What has divided them, what has held them on separate roads long enough that their very genes have begun to drift apart, is nothing more and nothing less than culture. The things their mothers taught them about what to eat, how to hunt, what to say, and whom to count as family. So when the dark fins rise off a coastline somewhere, off Spain, off Norway, off the cold green islands of the Pacific Northwest, the truth is that there is no such thing, really, as the killer whale. There is this family and that one, this nation and that one, each crossing the same grey water on errands the others would not recognize, each certain to its bones about what an orca is, and each of them quietly wrong about all the rest. One sea holding a dozen silent nations that have agreed without ever once negotiating to leave each other be. Which sets a single question turning over everything that follows. If it is not the ocean that keeps these worlds apart, if they could mix and simply never do, Then what is it that binds each whale so faithfully to its own? What holds these families together so completely that, in all that time, the lines have never once crossed? The thing that held them together had a name, though she never knew it. For more than 40 years, off the cold coast of the Pacific Northwest, the oldest killer whale anyone had managed to keep track of was a female the researchers listed in their catalogues as J2, and everyone else with some affection called Granny. When the photographs and the patient counting first began in the 1970s, she was already old, already a matriarch with grown children of her own. No one could ever say for certain just how old, only that she had been leading her family since before most of the scientists who studied her were born, and that she went on leading it, out at the front, for 40 years more. That is the answer to the question these animals keep setting us. What holds a killer whale to its own kind? What keeps the cultures from bleeding into one another across all that shared water is the simplest and least breakable bond in the animal world. In these fish-eating families, a killer whale never leaves its mother. The daughters stay and raise their own calves alongside her. The sons stay too, and the sons are the genuine surprise because in almost every other large animal on Earth, the young males are driven out to make their own way, while a killer whale son simply never goes. A male of 35, 6 tons in weight, his black fin standing as tall as a grown man, will spend every single day of his life within a few lengths of his mother, and when at last she dies, his own chances of seeing out the year fall off a cliff. The family is not a herd that males drift through. It is one old female and everyone she has ever given rise to, swimming together until death takes them one by one. So picture a night like the 10,000 nights of Granny's life. Far out on the open coast, no moon, the surface black and the swell long and slow, a family is travelling. A dozen animals, more, strung loosely across the dark. The salmon have been thin all season. The whales are hungry. The young ones do not know where to go. The old female does. Without any signal a watching human could name, she leans into a new course, a slow swing toward the north, and the whole family turns with her, each animal reading the movement of the one ahead, the new heading rippling back through the group until a dozen whales are following a memory that exists, as far as anyone can tell, in just one head among them. Her grown sons hold their places close on either side of her, as they always have, with none of the restless friction of a company of unrelated males. They move like what they are, one family spread across 100 meters of black water, every animal in it oriented, without seeming to think about it, to the oldest among them. What is actually inside that old head, we have no way to open and read. We cannot know whether she remembers the coast the way a person remembers a street, as a map, as a feeling, or as something we have no word for at all. But the behavior itself is not in any doubt because it has been watched and counted year upon year for decades. The family that follows the old female is the family that eats. That is the deeper strangeness of these animals, and it sets them among company almost no other creature keeps. A female killer whale can live to 80 or 90 years of age, yet she stops bearing young at around 40. She spends, in other words, the entire second half of a very long life unable to have calves of her own, and she spends it leading. This long survival of a female past the end of her fertility, what we call menopause, is one of the rarest arrangements in all of biology. Beyond human beings, it is known for certain in only a small handful of animals, and nearly all of them are whales, orcas, and a few of their close relatives. We and they belong to the same tiny, strange club, the animals whose females go on living and mattering long after their last child is born. For a long time, that looked like a real puzzle. Natural selection is ruthless about reproduction, and an animal that quits breeding while its body could still manage it ought, in theory, to be making a losing move. The long records of these whale families are what cracked it open. A calf whose grandmother is still alive turns out to be far more likely to survive than one whose grandmother has died. And the effect is sharpest in exactly the years that matter most, the hard ones, when the salmon fail to come, and the whole family must lean on someone who remembers where else and when the fish have run before. When researchers traced what happened after an old female died, they found the young of her family dying at markedly higher rates than before, and the loss falling hardest on the grand calves she was no longer there to guide. An old female past her own breeding is not a spent animal. She has become the most valuable member of the family, worth more to the survival of her line as its memory and its guide than she could ever be as the mother of one more calf. She is, in the plainest sense, a library. Think of what that means to carry. Not a fact or two, but the gathered weather of a lifetime, which inlet the fish favoured the year the water ran warm, which channel to try when the usual one comes up empty. Lessons laid down across 60 or 70 years and held against the day the family will need them. And it is not only the salmon runs that are kept in her. Everything lasting that makes one family of killer whales itself rather than some other, the calls they speak in, the hunting skills they keep, the map of a whole coastline and its moods, is learned, and learned above all from the old. The grandmother is the channel the entire culture runs through. She is the reason a family can stay a family across centuries, not because the family is fixed in the blood, but because a way of living is held in the minds of its eldest members and poured slowly and across a lifetime into its youngest. Lose her too soon, and a family loses more than a grandmother. It loses a portion of what it knows how to do. Granny is gone now. She was last seen in the autumn of 2016, an old, dark shape moving north along a coast she had travelled her whole life, and after that she was never seen again. But the thing she was does not end with the single animal who carried it. Somewhere tonight, off some black coast, an old female is leading her family through water no light reaches, turning them by a memory not one of them shares, toward a run of salmon that has carried the family through lean years before. She does not know that we are watching, or that we have ever given her kind a name. She knows the way. And strung out behind her in the dark, trusting it without question, the family follows the one among them who remembers. There is a question so simple it sounds almost foolish, and the answer to it runs deeper than almost anything else about these animals. When a family of the fish-eating killer whales is feeding, driving salmon up toward the surface, the water churning, the whole group hungry and intent, there will quite often be seals close by. Hauled out on the rocks, fat and warm and slow, a row of easy meals dozing in the sun a minute's swim away. And the whales, hard at work for their supper right beside them, an animal that could kill a seal without effort, will not touch a single one, will not even turn a head. Why would a hungry hunter leave that food entirely alone? To answer it, watch what the family does instead. The salmon are scattered and deep, and the whales work them as a team, fanning out across the channel, herding, driving a big chinook up into the shallows, where it has nowhere left to run. But when one of them finally takes the fish, something happens that is easy to miss and quietly extraordinary. The salmon does not simply disappear down a single throat. A grown chinook is a substantial animal, a metre of muscle and oil, and the whale that caught it breaks it and shares it. Pieces pass from mouth, to a mother, to a calf still learning the work, to a grown son who came up with nothing this time. They feed one another. Among the fish eaters, a meal is not a private thing. A good catch belongs, in some genuine sense, to the whole family, and the seals on the rocks sleep on untroubled, because to this family a seal is no more food than a stone is. It is not even that they prefer fish to flesh, they prefer one fish. Of all the salmon in the sea, and there are several kinds, some of them far more numerous, these whales want the Chinook, the largest and the fattest, the richest mouthful a cold ocean has to offer. There is a logic to it of a sort. A Chinook carries more oil, more sheer energy than any other salmon, and for an animal feeding a whole family out of the water, the richest fish is worth the trouble of being choosy. But the choosiness is real, and it is extreme. In some seasons, it is very nearly the only thing they eat. Across the year, the great majority of everything they swallow is that single species, hunted out from among all the rest. It is one of the stranger jokes of the living world. The apex predator of the seas, an animal with nothing above it and almost nothing it could not kill, turns out to be as narrow in its tastes as a panda among the bamboo, or a koala in its one kind of tree. The mammal hunters, the other kind, keep the same law in reverse. They live on seals and sea lions and the calves of other whales, and they will not take a fish, would slide through a river of salmon without a flicker of interest. The refusal runs just as deep on their side. A mammal hunter going hungry among salmon will no more eat the fish than the fish eaters will eat the seals. Two peoples sharing one ocean, and the deepest line between them, the line that more than any other keeps them from ever folding into one, is drawn at the dinner table. What an animal eats and what it will not is the truest mark of which kind of killer whale it is. Why the line should hold so absolutely, why it stands even against hunger, we do not entirely understand, and it is only honest to say so plainly. A great deal of it is simply that the knowledge was never there. A fish eater has never been taught how to take a seal, how to stalk one in silence, how to drown it, how to read the particular fear of a warm-blooded animal that knows it is being hunted. That skill lives in another culture entirely and was never poured into this one. It is a little like asking a man who has fished one river his whole life to suddenly bring down a deer with his bare hands, not for any lack of strength, but because nothing in his life has ever shown him how. Their bodies may play some part too, shaped over a long age around the chase and the catch of fish, rather than the heavier, more dangerous work of killing a mammal that fights back. But whether any of that fully explains the sheer depth of the refusal, the way a thin, hungry animal will let an easy meal sleep on a few lengths away and turn back to hunting fish that are not there, no one can honestly say. There is something at the bottom of this we have not reached. And here is where a beautiful thing turns frightening. The salmon are not what they were. The great runs of Chinook these families have lived on for longer than anyone can measure are thinning, year upon year, for reasons that are mostly our doing. And the whales are not adapting. They are not turning to the seals all around them. The other fish they will take are not Chinook and are not enough. And where the great salmon fail, the families go hungry and their numbers fall. The same deep loyalty to a single food that has held these families together for thousands of years is, in this particular century, helping to take them apart. A culture, it turns out, can become a cage. It is the oldest thing about them, older than the boats off Spain, older than our cities, older by far than the troubles we have carried into their water. Somewhere tonight, a calf is taking its first torn pieces of shared salmon from its mother's mouth and learning, without a single word, the one rule that will govern the whole of its life. This is food, and that is not. It is learning a law written down nowhere, carried in no gene, kept alive only in the long memory of the family, a law handed mouth to mouth across so many thousands of years that its beginning is lost completely. It has carried them safely through every hard age the sea has ever thrown at them, and it may, in this one, be the thing that finishes them. On a gravel beach on the Valdez Peninsula in Argentine Patagonia, at the very top of the tide, a killer whale is about to do the most dangerous thing it will ever do on purpose. Just offshore, a litter of sea lion pups is playing in the shallows, slick and clumsy, learning to swim in the white water at the edge of the land. The whale has been lying off the break for a while, watching, lining things up, waiting, it turns out, for the right wave. Then it comes. It drives in with everything it has, and at the last possible moment, where any other creature of the open sea would break off and turn for deep water, it does the precise opposite. It throws its whole body up onto the shore. 6 tons of deep ocean animal grinds up the slope on wet stones, the cobbles shifting and rattling under a weight they were never meant to hold, the whale wholly out of the water now, lunging across the gravel for a pup. It takes the pup, and then comes the harder half. A stranded whale is a dying whale if it cannot get back, because out of the water its own weight begins to crush it from the inside, and the beach has no mercy, and the tide does not wait. So it twists, heaving its body sideways, working with the next wave, wriggling and rolling back down the stones until the sea takes its weight again and it is gone, sliding into the deep with its catch as if the whole impossible maneuver had cost it nothing at all. What makes this remarkable is not the daring of it. It is that no killer whale is born knowing how to do it. The stranding is not instinct, it is a craft, a difficult, deadly one, and it has to be learned slowly across years the way a child learns to read. Along these same beaches, researchers who have watched the whales for decades have seen the young ones serving out their apprenticeship, hurling themselves at the shore in gentler spots where the stakes are lower, getting it wrong, sliding back, hauling around to try again, while the older animals stay close. And the adults have been seen doing something stranger still. They will beach themselves where there is no prey at all, for no reason a merely hungry animal would ever have, except that a calf is there beside them, watching. They have been seen shoving a stuck youngster back down toward the safety of the water. It is hard to watch all of that and call it anything but teaching. And teaching, in the strict sense, is one of the rarest things in the natural world. To qualify, an experienced animal has to go out of its way, at some cost to itself for no immediate gain, to help an inexperienced one learn. It has been convincingly shown in only a tiny handful of species on the entire planet. An old killer whale dragging itself onto a beach where there is nothing to eat, purely so that a calf can see how it is done, belongs on that very short list. The craft is old here, and it runs in families. One of the most famous of these whales was a great old male the researchers came to know as Mel, who worked these beaches for decades, recognizable at a glance by a dorsal fin that leaned permanently to one side, the legacy of a day years ago when someone shot him and he lived. Animals like Mel are how the knowledge stays alive. The young acquire it by watching their elders, season upon season, and the ones who never quite master it go hungry on the days the technique would have fed them. The occasional whale, misjudging the tide, has been caught on the stones and never made it back. A behavior that can kill the animal performing it is not the sort of thing instinct hands out for free. It has to be paid for, in years and in danger, and it has to be taught. And the beach charge is only one school of hunting among many. Travel to the cold fjords of northern Norway in the depths of winter, and the killer whales there are doing something completely different and every bit as learned. There the quarry is herring in shoals of millions, and the whales work as a single team to herd them, circling, driving the fish into a tight, panicking ball, blowing curtains of bubbles to pack it tighter, flashing their white undersides to drive it up against the surface, and then they stun it. A whale will drive its great tail into the massed fish with one explosive slap. the flukes whipping through the water at several times the acceleration of gravity, and a dozen or more herring will float up dead or dazed to be picked off at leisure. It is a method no Patagonian beach hunter would have the first idea how to perform. Travel to the far other end of the world, to the pack ice off Antarctica, and the craft changes yet again. Here a seal lies hauled out on a floating slab of ice, well out of reach, until a line of killer whales draws up side by side, dives together in perfect time, and drives a single great wave up and over the floe. The wash tips the ice or floods it and sweeps the seal into the water, where the rest of the family is waiting. It is engineering performed by animals in formation, and the most surprising part comes before any of it. The whales will often first raise their heads straight up out of the sea, a move called spy hopping, to look the seal over and, it seems, to check what kind of seal it is. They are after one species in particular. When the inspection turns up the wrong one, they will sometimes call the whole attack off. There are records of orcas washing a seal clean off the ice, getting a good look at it, finding it is not the kind they wanted, and simply letting it go. There is nothing automatic about that. It is a judgment made on the spot about whether the wrong prey is worth the work. None of these is instinct. The beach charge, the herring ball, the wave over the ice, each is a separate body of knowledge worked out somewhere long ago, refined across generations, and handed down by teaching from the old to the young. A killer whale is not born knowing how to be a killer whale. It is born into one particular school of it, and spends its childhood learning the single craft its family happens to keep, which is why an orca raised on the Patagonian beaches would be lost in the Antarctic ice, and the herring hunters of Norway would go hungry on a coast full of seals. There is no one way to hunt as an orca. There are only traditions, each of them an inheritance that has nothing whatever to do with blood. That is the thing worth carrying away from the gravel beach where we began. The young whale wallowing in the shallows, failing and trying and failing again, while a patient adult holds station beside it, is not running on some ancient program written in its cells. It is being shown how to live in its own corner of the sea, taught at real risk, a craft so finely fitted to that one beach and that one prey that it would be of no use anywhere else on earth. Each of these hunts is a small, exact agreement between a family of whales and the place that feeds it, an agreement that survives only because one generation takes the trouble to teach the next. And in a few of these families, the craft has been carried to an edge so fine, the specialization honed so far, that the hunt has stopped looking like hunting at all and begun to look like surgery. 2 killer whales patrol the coast of South Africa, and the great white sharks have learned to be afraid of them. The researchers call the pair port and starboard after the way their tall dorsal fins have each toppled over and lie flat against their backs, one to the left, one to the right, so that even at a distance there is no mistaking who has arrived. Between them, these 2 males have turned the killing of the most feared fish in the sea into something closer to surgery than to a hunt. It began as a mystery. Along that coast, every so often, the body of a great white shark would wash up on a beach, and that in itself was strange, because great whites do not simply die and drift ashore. Stranger still was the state of them. The sharks were whole, unmarked, but for a single clean wound low on the body, between the fins, and through that one neat opening, something had reached in and removed the liver, and very often nothing else. A 4-meter apex predator, emptied of one organ with the tidiness of a butcher, and left otherwise intact. For a while, no one could say what was capable of such a thing. Then the orcas were seen doing it, and the carcasses on the sand had their explanation. On a winter morning in June of 2023, off Mossel Bay on the country's southern coast, starboard showed how far the craft had come. A young great white, 2.5 meters of muscle and teeth, itself the kind of animal that empties a beach, was in the water near him. Starboard went for it alone. In under 2 minutes, a span of time almost too short to believe for the killing of a white shark, he had finished it. And when he rose to the surface, there was something pale and pinkish gripped in his jaws, glistening and unmistakable in the early light, the shark's liver, taken out almost whole. 100 meters away, his partner Port simply watched. He had not been needed. The liver is the entire point. In a large white shark, it is an enormous organ. It can make up a quarter or more of the animal's whole weight, heavy enough that a grown person would struggle to lift it, and it is rich, oily, very nearly pure energy. It is by a long way the most valuable mouthful the shark has to offer, and these orcas know exactly where it sits and exactly how to reach it. There are signs they may flip the shark over first, into the curious paralysis that comes over a shark held upside down, to still it before they begin. What is certain is the precision. The wound is clean, the liver slipped out through it, the rest of the great white frequently left untouched, drifting off whole and hollow, the unmistakable work of a specialist who has done this many, many times. And then there is the part that turns the whole order of the ocean on its head. When port and starboard appear on a stretch of coast, the great whites leave, not a handful of them, and not for an afternoon. Tagged sharks have been followed fleeing the moment the orcas show up and staying gone for weeks, even months at a stretch. Whole gathering grounds, places where great whites had reliably massed for as long as anyone had kept watch, have simply emptied. The great white shark is the animal our nightmares are built around, the closest thing the sea has to a pure monster. And it now spends its life glancing over its shoulder for something worse. It is tempting to lay the whole thing at the orca's door, to say that 2 killer whales cleared the South African coast of its great whites. The truth, as it usually is more tangled and rather less flattering to us. When researchers went carefully back through the records, they found that the long decline of the white sharks owed more to people than to predators. Decades of nets and baited lines strung along the beaches to keep swimmers safe, which had been killing sharks by the 100 year upon year. The orcas were a genuine pressure and a spectacular one, but they were the last shove against a population we had already spent half a century pushing toward the edge. The monster did not, in the end, undo the monster. We did most of that ourselves, and the orcas only finished a story we had long since begun. What port and starboard really show is how far this animal can carry a single idea. The overwhelming majority of killer whales will never touch a shark in their lives. These two have built an entire existence around one, refining a method so exact that they can take precisely what they want from the deadliest fish in the ocean and discard all the rest. It is the same engine that produced the beach chargers of Patagonia and the herring herders of the north, a learned specialism perfected over time, only pushed to its furthest and finest point. And there are early signs that it may no longer be theirs alone. Other orcas along that coast appear to be taking sharks now, in the same surgical fashion, which is exactly what the birth of a new tradition looks like in its first years. Something close to a fashion even, though one with rather higher stakes than a dead salmon worn as a hat. Somewhere off South Africa tonight, port and starboard are still out there, 2 tall bent fins moving along a dark coast, looking for the next shark. They empty a coastline of its great whites simply by arriving, and they have not the faintest idea that they do it. They were only ever after the liver. To watch them is to feel 2 things at once, a clean astonishment at what they are able to do, and beneath it a colder thing, the unease of having finally met the animal that frightens us, and they leave a question turning in the water behind them. Starboard found and killed a great white, alone, in 2 minutes, in water where almost nothing can be seen. The wave over the Antarctic ice needs a dozen whales moving as a single body. The herring ball needs a whole family acting in perfect concert in the dark. How do they manage it? How do they find their prey and plan and act together in a black ocean nearly empty of light? The answer is a sense we barely possess. The sense is sound, and the orca possesses it to a degree that should not seem possible. In total darkness, hundreds of meters down, a killer whale can find a single salmon in the empty black, tell it from every other fish in the sea, and know which way it is facing, without seeing a thing. It is a little as though a person could step into a pitch-dark room and know at once how many others were inside, and who each of them was, and which way they were turned, and something of what they were made of within. All by listening to the echoes of their own voice coming back off the bodies in the dark. That is roughly the world a killer whale lives in. It is made from the seabed up of sound. The sound itself comes not from the throat but from the head. Just below the blowhole sit a pair of structures the researchers call phonic lips. Tissue the whale snaps together, driving air across them the way a pinched balloon shrieks. The clicks this makes are passed forward into the melon, the rounded swell of the forehead, which is packed with a special fatty tissue that works as a lens, gathering the sound and aiming it out into the water as a tight, directed beam. The beam strikes whatever lies ahead, a fish, a seal, the seabed, another whale, and bounces back, and from those returning echoes, read at a speed almost beyond belief, the animal assembles a moving, three-dimensional picture of everything around it. It is seeing in every sense that matters, except that the medium is sound and not light. And it is a stranger, deeper kind of seeing than our own because of one simple fact. Light bounces off surfaces, but sound goes through them. The clicks pass into a fish and echo back off the swim bladder inside it, off bone, off the boundaries where one kind of tissue gives way to another, so that what the whale perceives is not only the outside of a thing but something of its insides, the way an ultrasound looks within a body. An orca, it is thought, can sense in this way things hidden from any eye. A fish buried in the sand, the pocket of air in another whale's lungs, quite possibly even the small new shape of a calf growing inside its mother. It is not merely looking at its world. It is looking into it. The reach of all this is hard to take in because sound behaves in water as it never does in air. It travels faster there and very much farther, so that the orca's world of sound is not the small bright bubble our eyes give us, but something vast, stretching out for miles in every direction through the dark, and the whales hear across a range that leaves us standing. Our ears give out at around 20,000 cycles a second. Above that, the world falls silent to us. A killer whale hears on at past 160,000, 8 times higher, into a whole register of sound we did not even know existed until we built instruments to find it. There has always been an entire dimension of the ocean made of sound pouring through the same water we swim in, and we are deaf to almost all of it. The whales have been living inside it the whole time. Drop a microphone into the right stretch of sea, and a little of what they hear comes through at last. A family of the fish-eaters at work fills the water with noise, a downpour of clicks as their beams rake the dark for salmon, the trains of them speeding up into a tight buzz as a whale closes on its fish, all of it threaded through with the whistles and calls they use to keep the hunt together. The salmon can scarcely hear a note of it. Their ears are poor at these high frequencies, and so there is no cost to the racket and every advantage in it. Now follow a different family, the mammal hunters, onto the trail of a seal, and the sea around them falls silent. They have switched off the very sense that lets them see in the dark, and they go hunting half blind. instinct, working on memory and shadow, and the small sounds the seal itself lets slip, rather than risk a single ping, because a seal, unlike a salmon, hears beautifully. One stray click, and the meal is gone. This is the deep cleverness of it, and it took researchers a while to understand. The two kinds of killer whale are not simply loud or quiet by temperament. Each has tuned its sound to the ears of what it eats. The fish eaters can afford to be loud because their prey is nearly deaf to them. The mammal hunters must be silent because their prey is not. Sound, for these animals, is not just a way of taking in the world. It is a tool to be wielded or withheld, a weapon that doubles as a liability, and they know, in whatever way an orca knows such things, precisely when to use it and when to disappear. There is a shadow across all of this, and it should be said even here. A creature whose entire life is built of sound is a creature that can be deafened. The ocean these whales came up in was, by our measure, a quiet place, and it is quiet no longer. The engines of our ships have filled it, shore to shore, with a low and unbroken roar, sitting squarely in the range the whales use to hunt and to speak, smothering their clicks and burying their calls. For an animal that sees with its ears, our noise is not a nuisance. It is a blindness and a silence, pressed on them from the outside. Tonight, though, somewhere in the black water, a family of hunters is gliding toward a sleeping seal with every voice stilled, holding the quiet the way the rest of us hold our breath. And for these few minutes, in a life otherwise drenched in sound, they make no noise at all. Perhaps that is the strangest thing about them, that an animal so wholly composed of sound should also know exactly how to vanish into silence. And it is only afterward, when the hunting is finished and the danger has passed, that the water around them fills once more with their voices. And those voices, it turns out, are stranger still. On a long evening in late summer, when the salmon run thick and the families can afford to gather, the fish-eating killer whales come together in numbers, several pods at once, dozens of animals, converging on the same rich stretch of water for no urgent reason anyone can name, to feed, yes, but also, it seems, simply to be in one another's company. These reunions have something of celebration about them. The whales roll and breach and trail along flank to flank, and the sea, which an hour before carried only the hard clicks of the hunt, fills now with something else entirely, a weave of whistles and cries and creaking, pulsed calls, overlapping and answering, carrying through the dark from animals a mile and more apart. Somewhere in the thick of it, a calf is trying out its voice, producing a loose, garbled version of the sounds the adults are making, like a toddler mouthing words it cannot yet shape. It is, beyond question, a conversation, many conversations at once, though what is being said, if anything is being said at all, no one can honestly claim to know. What can be known, and this is the strange part, is who is speaking. Every family of these whales has its own way of speaking, not a language exactly. No one has ever shown that the calls carry the kind of meaning our words do, but something closer to an accent or a set of inherited family songs, a repertoire of perhaps a dozen distinct calls, particular cries and whistles that this pod uses and the pod across the strait does not. A Canadian researcher named John Ford spent years recording these voices off the coast of British Columbia and matching each to the family that made it. And the dialects he mapped turned out to be remarkably stable. A pod will use the same signature calls, plainly recognizable, across decades, passing them down all but unchanged from one generation to the next. They are so distinctive that a trained ear, given nothing but a recording, can often name the very pod that produced it. Closely related families share a handful of calls, like branches of one clan that still sound a little alike. Families from separate lineages share none at all. No one can say what they are saying, but anyone with the right records can say beyond doubt exactly who they are. That calf practicing its voice at the gathering is doing the most important work of its young life, learning to speak the way its family speaks. None of it is inborn. A killer whale is not born knowing its pod's calls. It picks them up slowly over months and years, its babble tightening by degrees into the true dialect of its family, the way a child's babble resolves into the language of the house it grows up in. And we know the calls are learned rather than written into the genes because, given enough time, they change. Listening across the years, Ford and others caught a shared call slowly drifting within a single pod until it no longer quite matched the version the cousins still used, an accent wandering away from itself in just the way human accents drift across distance and generations. A sound that can drift is a sound that was learned. Nothing carried in the blood picks up a regional accent. Just how far this gift for learning sounds can reach became clear, oddly enough, from a single captive orca in the south of France. Her name was Wiki, and a few years ago, in a careful experiment, her trainers asked her to attempt something no one was certain an orca could manage, to copy human speech, and she did. Through her blowhole, an instrument built for nothing remotely like our words, she produced recognizable versions of hello, of bye-bye, of her keeper's name, of a counted 1, 2, 3. The scientists who ran the study were scrupulous, to their great credit, about what it did and did not show. Wiki understood none of it. She was not talking, only imitating, giving back a sound she had been shown. But that is exactly the point. The machinery was there, the rare and astonishing ability to hear a wholly new sound and take it up as its own, the very ability a wild calf uses to learn its mother's calls, and the very ability by which a fashion for wearing a salmon or for shoving at a boat can pass from one whale to the next until a whole community has it. This is why the voices matter as much as they do. They are the thread on which the entire culture is strung. The hunting crafts, the food laws, the fleeting crazes, all of it moves through a population the same way the dialects do, by one animal listening to another and learning. Pull on the thread of the voice and the whole fabric comes with it. And the voice is more than a carrier. It is, for these animals, something very close to a name. A whale knows its family by sound. Scattered across miles of black water, unable to see one another at all, the members of a pod remain one pod because each can hear, in the calls returning through the dark, the particular voices it has known since birth. Its mother, its brothers, the old female, somewhere out in front. To hear the dialect is to hear home. Consider then what that must mean at the margins of a life. A whale that loses its family loses the only others in the ocean who share its exact voice, and an orphan raised among strangers may grow up speaking an accent that no living whale answers to. How any of that feels from the inside, we cannot know. But the voice is identity here as surely as anything we understand about them, and identity is not a small thing to be left without. A voice, like everything else these families carry, is a thing handed down. The calls a calf is learning tonight, somewhere out in the dark, are older than the calf, older than its mother, older than the oldest animal in the pod. A sound passed from voice to voice down a line of mothers that runs back further than anyone can trace. But there is a quiet, momentous fact folded into all of it. An accent, left to itself across enough generations, does not hold still, it drifts. The cousins who once sounded alike grow slowly stranger to each other until a day arrives when two families share not a single call between them. And a parting that begins in the voice does not always stay there. Carried far enough, for long enough, the same slow drift that splits one accent into two may, in the end, split one animal into two. Which is no longer a thought experiment. It is a question scientists have begun to ask in earnest about these very whales, Here, then, is the answer they have begun to arrive at, and it is one of the strangest things now known about any animal alive. In the cold water off the Pacific Northwest, two kinds of killer whale pass each other almost daily. To the eye, they are the same creature, the same black and white body, the same tall fin, the same shape rising and falling through the swell, and yet they have not bred with one another in something like 300,000 years. Their genes have been drifting apart in plain sight, in shared water, for longer than our own species has existed, and a serious body of scientists now argues that they should no longer be counted as one animal at all, but as two. What has held them apart for all that time is nothing physical. It is what their grandmothers taught them. It can be watched by anyone who knows what to look for. A family of the fish-eaters moves up a channel, and a group of the mammal hunters crosses the same water a few hundred meters off, and for a moment the two are in plain view of each other, close enough to hear, close enough to touch, two sets of dark fins under one grey sky. Nothing passes between them. No greeting and no challenge, not so much as a flicker of recognition that the other is even the same kind of creature. To look at, they are indistinguishable. An untrained eye would see a single species sharing a stretch of sea. What is actually crossing that water is two. To feel how strange this is, it helps to remember how new species are usually made. The textbook story is a story of separation. A population gets cut in two, a river changes course, a mountain range lifts, a handful of animals are carried to an island and cannot get back, and the two halves, no longer able to breed with each other, begin to drift apart. Across many thousands of generations, sealed off by that physical barrier, each accumulates its own mutations and its own adaptations, until one day they could not interbreed even if the barrier fell. Geography does the work, and deep time finishes it. That is how, as far as we ever knew, the tree of life puts out a new branch. The killer whales are doing it with none of that. There is no barrier between them at all, no mountain, no ocean, not a single mile of distance. They live in the same water, cross paths constantly, and could interbreed tomorrow. They simply do not. A young fish-eater will only ever court and mate with another fish-eater. The mammal hunters keep to their own, and the reason is not physical but cultural. They speak different dialects, hunt different food, keep different company, and carry, in everything they have been taught, a settled sense of who is their kind and who is not. Culture has built the wall that a mountain range usually builds. And behind that wall, exactly as if an ocean lay between them, the two lineages have been quietly coming apart for hundreds of thousands of years. And here is where it stops being a matter of behavior and becomes a matter of flesh. When researchers read the genomes of these whales, they found the separation written into the genes themselves. The two kinds carry different versions of genes tied to diet, to digestion, to the very work of turning their separate foods into living tissue, the body slowly adjusting, generation by generation, to the culture it was born into. This is the part that turns the whole picture over. We are used to thinking of biology as the foundation and culture as the decoration laid on top. The genes first, the learned behavior second. In the killer whale, it appears to have run the other way. The culture came first, and the genes have been following it, reshaping the animal from the outside in. All of which is why, in 2024, a team of scientists tried to make it official. They laid out the evidence, formally proposed that the fish-eaters and the mammal hunters be recognized as two separate species, and went so far as to draw up new scientific names for each. The proposal did not entirely carry. The committee that rules on such things weighed it and in the end held back, granting the two a provisional, in-between standing, distinct enough to be named apart but not yet officially split, And that hesitation is not a failure of the science, it is the most honest possible description of where these animals actually are. Not quite one species any longer, not quite two. Caught in the very act of dividing and moving faster than our categories can be made to follow. It leaves a question hanging that turns out to have no clean answer. What exactly is a species? We like to imagine the living world sorts itself into tidy, separate kinds, each one a fixed box with firm walls. But the boundary between these whales is not fixed and was never firm. It is being drawn right now by the animals themselves, by what they choose to eat and whom they choose to speak to, and which calves they raise alongside which. When a difference in what a calf was taught slowly becomes a difference in its blood, the old words start to bend. Is it still culture at that point, or has it become biology? Is it one animal or two? The honest answer is that it is somewhere in between, and that the question may simply be the wrong shape for what is happening. Once that idea is in view, everything we have seen about these animals rearranges itself around it. The fad for wearing a dead salmon, the family that holds to its one fish even as it goes hungry, the beach chargers and the herring herders, the dialects handed down a line of mothers, even perhaps the young whales off Spain who have taken to breaking the rudders of boats. All of it is the same force, working at different scales. Culture in this animal is not a charming layer painted over the biology. It is down in the engine room. It decides what the whale eats and how it hunts and who it counts as its own, and, given enough time, what species it belongs to. We have spent all this time speaking of the orca's culture as something the animal has. It may be nearer the truth to call it something the animal is becoming. Somewhere off the coast tonight, a calf is swimming close against its mother, learning her calls, learning which fish to want and which to let pass, learning the particular way its family moves through the world. It does not know that in doing so, it is choosing a side. It does not know that the small daily business of being raised, of eating this and not that, of speaking this way and not the other, is, across the slow reach of time, splitting its kind in two. It is only becoming what its mother is, and that, it turns out, is enough. A new kind of animal is being made tonight, in the dark water off an ordinary coast, not by an ice age, not by a rising sea, not by some 100,000-year accident of geography, but by a mother teaching a calf the things her own mother taught her. The whale does not know it is becoming something new, it is far too busy becoming itself. The wheel goes soft in the hands again, off Gibraltar at dusk. The rudder takes its first heavy blow, and the shudder climbs up through the hull and into the bones of everyone aboard, exactly as it did the first time. Dark shapes rise and turn behind the boat. The crew reach for the radio. It is the same scene we began with, in the same stretch of water. And yet it has changed entirely, because this time almost nothing about it is a mystery. We can read it now, move by move, the way one reads a sentence in a language one has slowly, finally learned to speak. Look at who is actually doing it. The animals working the rudder are young, juveniles mostly, a few years old, the very age that takes up every craze these whales have ever been known to invent. The large adult hanging back a little way off is not directing an assault. It is doing what the grown ones always do while the young ones play, which is simply to be nearby. There is no fury in the water, and none of the tight coordination a real attack would demand. Only a handful of youngsters absorbed in a game, taking turns at a thing that pushes back while their elders wait. We have seen this exact shape before. A young whale lights on a new and useless thing to do, the others copy it, and for a season it becomes the height of fashion, a dead salmon balanced on the head off one coast, a rudder shoved in slow circles off another. The boats are not an uprising, they are this year's salmon hat. What we may be watching off the coast of Spain then is the birth of a tradition, the first uncertain years of a new cultural fashion caught on camera as it happens. Consider how rarely we ever get to see such a thing. Almost every custom we know of in these animals, the hunts, the dialects, the food laws, was already old, already fully formed by the time we noticed it. We have only ever met the finished article. The boats are different. We are not studying a custom here so much as watching one being invented. Most such fads burn out as the salmon hat did, gone within a season or two. A few take hold and last, passed down and refined, the way the shark hunters of South Africa seem to be handing on their surgical craft. Which of the two the boat behavior will turn out to be, no one yet knows. It has already begun to shift its ground, fading in the strait while surfacing further north, the way a living thing moves. But either way, it is not aggression. It is the very same force we have been following all along, a thing invented by one mind and carried by others through a family. Caught for once, right at its beginning. The press naturally gave the phenomenon a face and a villain. Her name is White Gladys. Gladys being the tag the researchers attach to every one of these boat-touching whales, borrowed from an old scientific name for the species. She is an adult female among the most active of them all, and her own daughters do it too. The habit runs in her small family the way these things tend to. And a story grew up around her, that she had once been struck by a boat or snared in a fishing line, and had launched all of this as a kind of revenge, schooling her young to strike back at the things that had hurt her. It is a powerful story, and it is almost entirely a guess. No such injury was ever recorded. The motive was supplied by us, not by her, because a wounded creature taking its revenge is a tale we understand in our bones. The grudge is ours to imagine. She has never shown the faintest sign of carrying one. Everything we have learned about her kind points the other way, not toward a vengeful avenger, but toward a young animal, and then her family, and then her neighbors, taking up a strange new game because, for the moment, it is the thing their people are doing. And here, at last, is the part that ought to stop anyone cold. The whales behind all this, the entire population responsible for a phenomenon that has filled headlines around the world, sunk a handful of boats, and launched 1,000 frightened theories, number around 36 animals, fewer than 40 all told. The whole notorious fleet would fit with room to spare in a single classroom. They are not a rising army. They are one of the most endangered communities of killer whales on Earth, a tiny, closed family of families that lives by following the bluefin tuna through one narrow strait, and that is sliding quietly toward extinction even as we argue about its intentions. We spent 5 years afraid of them. We managed to record and describe their voices for the very first time only at the close of 2025, which means we have just begun to learn how they speak to one another at very nearly the last moment we will have the chance. We are coming to understand these whales, it turns out, at precisely the point where we stand to lose them. So the boat drifts, rudderless, in the failing light, and the young whales tire of the game and slip away to rejoin their family, and the sea closes over them as it always has. Only now we know what we have been watching all this time. Not an attack, not revenge, but a game invented by a few of the rarest whales in the ocean in what may be the last short while they have left to invent anything at all. The mystery that drew us out here in the first place is, more or less, solved, and yet the deeper question it was always resting on has only grown larger. A pointless catching game, a craft as exact as surgery, a tradition that can prise a species in two. What kind of mind is it exactly that does all of this? What is truly going on in there, behind the eye that lifts once, clear of the water, to take in the boat above it? and is gone. What is going on in there? It is the question the whole story keeps circling back to, and it is fair to want a clean answer to it, a number, a ranking, some single fact that settles where this animal stands. The trouble is that the honest answer is not clean at all. It is, in the end, a lesson in the limits of what we can ever know about another mind, and it begins with the one piece of evidence everyone reaches for first, and trusts the most, and ought to trust the least: the brain itself. Lay the brain of a killer whale on a table beside the brain of a human being, and the comparison seems to end the argument before it starts. The orca's brain is enormous, around 6 kilograms of it, against the kilogram, and a third we carry in our own skulls. The second largest brain of any animal on Earth, outdone only by the sperm whale. And it is not merely big. Its surface is folded and refolded into a denser maze of ridges and valleys than ours, packing in even more of the wrinkled outer layer, where so much of the heavy thinking is done. It even carries a whole region that our brains lack, an extra lobe whose purpose we are still only guessing at. Set the two organs side by side and the conclusion looks obvious. And yet the scientists who actually study these brains tend to be the most cautious people in the room, because they know that nearly everything the obvious conclusion suggests is either unproven or simply wrong. Begin with size, since size is what impresses us. Raw weight on its own reveals very little. A sperm whale's brain is larger still, and no one holds the sperm whale up as the cleverest creature alive. What counts for more is the size of a brain measured against the body it has to run, and by that yardstick the killer whale, for all its bulk, comes in below the common dolphin and well below us. The largest brain in the room is not even the largest brain for its body in the room. And in any case, that relative measure is itself a crude instrument, distrusted by the very people who reach for it. A brain is not a bucket that holds a little more mind for every extra gram. It goes on like that all the way down through the case. The particular brain cells, most often paraded as proof of orca tenderness, special spindle-shaped neurons tied in us to social feeling and self-awareness, turn out to have been counted not in killer whales at all, but in their relatives, in humpbacks and belugas and bottlenose dolphins. We assume orcas carry them too, but the counting was never done, and even where the cells have been found, what they actually do remains honestly unclear. And there is a respected neuroscientist, Paul Manger, who has spent years arguing that we have talked ourselves into the whole picture, that a brain that large, in water that cold, may be carrying so much tissue not to entertain great thoughts, but simply to keep itself warm, and that a good many of the study's trumpeting cetacean genius would not survive a hard, skeptical look. He may well be wrong. Plenty of his colleagues are sure he is. But the fact that the argument can be made at all, and made seriously, tells us how thin the hard evidence underneath the headlines really is. So if the hardware will not settle it, what will? The answer is the one that has been in front of us the entire time. The real evidence for the mind of the killer whale was never going to be found in a jar or on a scan. It is out in the water, in everything the animal does. It is the fad that sweeps 3 pods and then vanishes. The hunt taught at mortal risk from mother to calf, the surgeon's precision of the shark killers, the dialect handed down a line of grandmothers, the food law a family will go hungry to keep, the slow, staggering business of a culture prizing a species in 2. There is no need to weigh the brain to be impressed by a mind that can do all of that. The behavior is the better evidence, and it always was. The brain only tells us the machinery is there. The life tells us what the machinery is for. It is worth being this careful, and not only for the sake of accuracy. The easy story, Orcas are geniuses, orcas have language, orcas feel exactly what we feel, is flattering, and it sells, but it quietly does the animal a disservice. It turns the orca into a mirror, a thing valued for how much of ourselves we can see in it. The harder, humbler story leaves the animal alone to be itself, strange, formidable, and not obliged to resemble us at all. Because even out in the water, watching everything the animal does, we eventually run up against a wall we cannot get past. We can weigh the brain to the gram and chart the behavior for 50 years, and we still cannot answer the question a child would ask first: what is it like to be a killer whale? What does the world feel like from inside that mind? Does it feel like anything at all? Of that, the deepest question there is, we know essentially nothing, and there is a real chance we never will. We can stand at the very edge of another mind and describe everything that comes out of it. We cannot cross over and look out through its eyes. Ask an honest scientist whether the orca is as intelligent as we are, and the honest scientist does not say yes and does not say no. The honest scientist says it is not the right question, and we may not be built to ask a better one. Perhaps that is the right place to leave it. The mind of a killer whale is not a higher or a lower rung on some single ladder with ourselves at the top. It is a different kind of mind altogether, grown over millions of years to do a different kind of work. To hold a family together across miles of dark water, to carry a culture down the generations, to be, with enormous success, a killer whale. It fits its world the way our minds fit ours, and it owes us no account of itself. We have spent a long time trying to take its measure. The one time we came truly close enough, we believed, to look right into it, we managed it by lifting the animal out of that world altogether and lowering it into a tank. And that is a darker story, and it is ours. His name was Tahlequah, and for most of his life he lived in a tank. He had been taken from the sea off Iceland in 1983, a calf of about 2, netted away from his mother and his family and the dialect he had only begun to learn, and shipped to a marine park on the far side of the world. By the time he died in 2017, he had spent more than 30 years in captivity, performing for crowds, and he had been involved in the deaths of 3 people. The last of them, in 2010, was a senior trainer named Dawn Bronchot, an experienced woman who knew him as well as anyone alive. In front of a holiday stadium full of families, at the quiet end of an ordinary show, the water around her simply went wrong, and she did not come out of it. It was not the first time. Years earlier, at a smaller park in Canada, a young trainer had fallen into his pool and drowned as the whales there kept her from climbing out. And once, a man who slipped into the grounds after closing was found dead on Tahlequah's back the next morning. 3 deaths across 3 decades, all of them turning on a single captive whale. A documentary called Blackfish carried his story to the world in 2013 and made an argument that struck a deep nerve. That an animal built to swim 100 miles of open ocean in a day and to spend its whole life inside a family does not fare well in a concrete box, and that the breakdown, when it comes, may be of our making. The argument is not airtight. The park disputed it, and what was truly in Tahlequah's mind is, as always, beyond our reach. But the broad shape of it is hard to wave away, because here is the fact that ought to sit at the very center of how we think about this animal. Every human being ever killed by a killer whale, every single one in all the years we have kept records, died in captivity. In the wild, where these animals number in the tens of thousands and have shared the water with swimmers and divers and fishermen for as long as there have been swimmers and divers and fishermen, the most powerful predator in the sea has never once taken a human life. Not once. The killer of the name, it turns out, is very largely a killer of our own manufacture. an animal we tore from its family and its ocean and its language, sealed into a space barely larger than its own body, and then professed to find frightening when something inside it gave way. And Tahlequah was not even the hardest case. Another orca, caught as a youngster in 1970 and renamed Lolita, lived out 53 years in a tank in Miami, most of them with no other killer whale anywhere near her, in a pool that would have been cramped for an animal a third her size. She died in 2023, only months after an agreement had at last been reached to move her toward a sheltered bay near the waters where she was born. She never made the journey. 53 years, an entire human lifetime, spent alone in a box by a creature whose whole nature is family and ocean and the open dark. Set against all of this is a far older story, one that has nothing to do with cages. For a stretch of the 19th century and into the 20th, in a place called Twofold Bay on the remote southeast coast of Australia, something close to a partnership existed between people and killer whales. A family of whalers, the Davidsons, hunted the great baleen whales that passed the coast each winter, and a pod of orcas, by the whalers' own accounts, hunted alongside them. The killer whales would find a passing whale, herd it into the bay, and then thrash and slap the water beside the whalers' cottages to raise the alarm. When the boats rowed out, the orcas helped harry and hold the giant while the men did the killing. And then came their half of the bargain, an arrangement the whalers called the law of the tongue. The carcass was left to the killer whales for a day or so, and they took from it the lips and the tongue, the parts they prized, before the people hauled away the rest. The most famous of those whales was a great male the people called Old Tom, who worked the bay for decades and grew so familiar that his death in 1930 made the news. His skeleton still stands in a small museum in the town of Eden, and the teeth carry worn grooves that, the locals say, came from gripping the whalers' ropes. How much of the old account is exact and how much has been polished by a century of retelling, no one can now be certain. It reaches us mostly through the whalers' own descendants. But the bones are real, and a partnership in some form plainly happened. For something like 90 years off one quiet Australian bay, the most feared predator in the ocean and a handful of human beings hunted the same waters as allies. The animal we caged and called a monster once chose, of its own accord, to work at our side. The truth is that we have never managed to leave the killer whale alone to be itself. We have made it a monster and a marvel by turns, and reached every time for a story larger than the animal. Even our admiration runs to myth. The most celebrated orca of recent times, the old matriarch called Granny, was reported the world over to have reached 105 years of age, a figure that turned out to rest on a guess about her family that the genetics later overturned. She was very old, certainly, but the famous number was ours, not hers. We do it in both directions at once. We conjure a vengeful killer in a tank and an impossibly ancient sage on a wave, and neither one is quite the creature actually in the water. The slow, hard work of the last few decades, the science, the patient watching, the closing of the tanks one by one, has been the work of setting those stories down and learning at last to see the animal plainly. Through all of it, the harpoons and the partnership, the capture nets and the show tanks, the monster and the marvel, the orca itself has barely registered us. It has gone on being precisely what it always was, a family, a culture, a hunter in the cold dark, wholly indifferent to the rise and fall of our opinions about it. Our stories have changed a dozen times over. The animal has not changed at all, and there is one last turn in the tale, the hardest of them, and it is happening right now. We are finally learning to leave the killer whale alone, to stop the captures, to empty the tanks, to look at it clearly. But while we were busy first fearing it and then adoring it, we were also, without ever quite meaning to, taking its world apart. The real danger between us was never the whale's teeth, it was always our hands, and the worst of what they have done is only now coming clear. The worst of it has a number, and the number is small. The whales we have been following most closely, the fish-eaters of the Salish Sea, the family Granny led for 40 years, the very ones who, a generation ago, took to wearing dead salmon on their heads for a single strange summer, belong to a people called the Southern Residents. And there are, as of the most recent count, around 74 of them left in the world. Not 74,000 or even 7,400, 74. They are counted one by one every year by researchers who know each animal on sight, by the nicks in its fin and the grey of its saddle, the way a family knows its own. And every year, the count is read like a held breath. One of the 3 pods that make up the group, the one known as K, is down to 14 animals, the fewest since anyone began keeping track. The entire population, every southern resident killer whale alive on Earth, would fit into a single school bus with seats to spare. To see what is happening to them, follow a family out into the San Juan Islands on a summer day. The whales are strung across the water in the old way, an aunt or a grandmother out in front, searching. And they are hungry. It shows in good years and bad, in the way the hunt has changed. But the sea they are hunting in is not the sea their grandmothers knew. It is loud. The Salish Sea is one of the busiest stretches of water on the whole coast, threaded with the engines of container ships and ferries and the small boats that come in their dozens to watch the whales themselves, and all of it pours into the water as a low, grinding wall of noise, sitting squarely on the frequencies the whales need to hunt and to speak. An animal that finds its food by listening is being asked to listen through a foghorn that never stops. Its clicks go out into the murk and come back drowned. The calls that hold the family together are swallowed before they can carry. There is a bitter symmetry in it. The boats that come to marvel at the whales are part of the din that is helping to starve them. The whales search on, half-deafened, for a fish that, more and more, is simply not there. For the fish is the heart of it. These whales eat one thing above all others, the Chinook salmon, the largest of the Pacific salmon, the food their entire culture is built around. The Chinook is also known fittingly as the king salmon, and the king is failing. A century of dammed rivers, ruined spawning grounds, and overfishing has thinned the great runs to a fraction of what they were. And the whales that live by them are no longer getting enough to eat. This is the trap we glimpsed earlier, closing now in earnest. The food law that makes a southern resident what it is, take the king salmon and nothing else, was, for 10,000 years, the soundest rule in the sea. It has quietly become a death sentence because the one food the law permits is vanishing, and a culture cannot rewrite itself in a single generation. The kings of the ocean are starving for the kings of the river. And there is a third blow, quieter than the others, and crueler. These whales carry in the fat of their own bodies some of the heaviest loads of industrial poison ever measured in any animal on the planet. For decades, the world manufactured a family of chemicals called PCBs, and though most countries banned them long ago, they refused to break down. They wash to the sea, climb the food chain rung by rung, and gather at the very summit in the blubber of the top predator. A southern resident is, in a sense, the place where all that old poison finally comes to rest. One sweeping study estimated that contaminants alone now threaten more than half of all the killer whale populations on Earth. A projection some scientists have since questioned, but that none have managed to dispel. And here is the part that is hardest to say plainly. A mother unloads much of her lifetime's accumulated burden into her milk, and so into her firstborn calf, which therefore receives the most concentrated dose of all. One of the reasons that so many first calves do not live out their first year. The poison passes down the generations like a terrible inheritance, mother to child, along the very bond that is otherwise these animals' greatest strength. Any one of these would be a grave threat on its own. Together, they make a trap with no easy way out, because each one worsens the others. The salmon are scarce, so the whales go hungry. The noise makes the scarce salmon harder still to find, and when a starving whale begins to burn its own blubber to stay alive, all the poison stored in that fat is released at once into its blood, so that the hungrier it grows, the more thoroughly it is poisoned. Scarcity, noise, and toxin, each sharpening the edge of the next. It is a slow vice, tightening from three sides at once. In 2024, researchers ran the figures forward and found that, if nothing changes, this small nation of whales could be gone within about 40 years, a single human lifetime from now. They have already fallen from nearly 100 animals within living memory to the 70-odd that remain. The decline is not a mystery, and it is not an accident, and it is in no sense the whale's own doing. We dammed the rivers and overfished them. We filled the water with noise. We made the poison and let it run down to the sea. The most powerful predator in the ocean is going hungry in its own home, and every part of the reason is us. And still, they go on. Out in the San Juans tonight, a family of the rarest whales on Earth is moving through the dark, the old female in front, leading them along the routes her own grandmother taught her, toward the runs that fed the family for 10,000 years. The salmon are thin, and the water is loud, and the poison is in their blood, and not one of them knows any of it. They know only that they are hungry, and that the fish are not where the fish have always been, and that they must keep looking. They have no idea that they are vanishing. They are simply doing what they have always done. Being a family, holding to the old knowledge, searching the cold water for the kings, for as long as there are any of them left to search. In the summer of 2018, in the waters off the coast of Washington, a southern resident killer whale gave birth to a calf, the first the struggling population had managed to produce in 3 years, a birth the researchers who watch these whales had been waiting a long time to see. The calf was a female. She lived for about half an hour, and then she died, there at the surface, in the first light of her only morning. What her mother did next is the thing the world remembers. She did not let the body sink. She lifted it, balancing the small dead calf across the broad flat of her head, or nosing it ahead of her through the water with her brow. And each time it slipped off or began to slide away into the dark below, she dived after it, brought it back to the surface, and carried it on. She did this for 17 days. Across those 17 days, she traveled something on the order of 1,000 miles, up and down the inland sea, and in all that time she did not once let the calf go down. The researchers knew her in their records as J35. The world came to know her as Tahlequah. A dead calf is dead weight, and 17 days is a very long time. The body would have begun to come apart. It kept sinking, and she kept retrieving it, over and over, while also somehow finding the time and strength to feed herself. And she did not do it alone. Her family stayed with her the whole way, and on several of those days when she appeared to tire, other members of the pod were seen to take the calf and bear it themselves for a while before passing it back to her. Whatever was happening, it was happening to all of them, a whole family arranging itself for more than 2 weeks around the body of a newborn that had lived for half an hour. The world watched because by then the world was watching these whales, and it gave the thing a name: the Tour of Grief. It is hard to think what else to call it. Anyone who has ever stood at the edge of a loss recognized at once what they believed they were seeing: a mother who would not or could not put her child down. The footage moved people who had never given a killer whale a single thought. For a few weeks in 2018, a great many human beings found themselves grieving in earnest for a whale they had never met and a calf that had no name. And here we have to be careful, more careful than the moment makes us want to be. Because the honest truth is that we do not know what Tahlequah felt. We cannot. We can describe precisely what she did, down to the day and the mile. We can note that this behavior, the carrying of a dead calf, sometimes for a long time, has been recorded in killer whales before, and in other whales, and in dolphins and elephants, and our close cousins among the apes. We can say that it is consistent with what, in ourselves, we would call mourning, and that it is genuinely difficult to explain as nothing at all. But we cannot climb inside that mind and find out whether what is in there is grief, or something like it, or something we have no word for, or nothing of the kind. The scientists who study her are scrupulous about this, and they are right to be. They will tell us what she did. They will not tell us what it meant to her, because they do not know, and neither does anyone else. And strangely, that uncertainty does not diminish the thing, it deepens it. To insist that she felt exactly what a human mother feels would be to make her a smaller and simpler creature than she is, a mirror again instead of an animal. The truth is larger and stranger, that here is a mind wholly unlike our own, shaped by a different world, and that out of that mind came an act we cannot fully read and cannot look away from. 17 days of refusing, by some logic entirely her own, to let a dead calf go. We do not need to borrow her feelings in order to be moved by that. It is enough to watch what she did, and to admit honestly that we do not understand it, and perhaps never will. There is a coda, and it is a hard one. In the first days of 2025, Tahlequah had another calf, and within a couple of weeks that calf too was dead. And once again, in the cold winter water, she lifted the small body and began to carry it. She did it for days. We watched a second time, knowing even less than we had thought we knew the first time, as the same whale, 7 years older, did again the thing she had done before, over the body of another of her young. This is where the private loss, if that is what it is, runs back into the larger story. Tahlequah is one of the 70-odd southern residents, one of the starving family we have just finished counting. Her calves are not dying by chance. They are dying because there are not enough salmon, because the mothers are too thin and too laden with poison to carry their young through to safety, because a population this small and this besieged loses more babies than it can ever spare. Her loss, whatever it is to her, is the loss of the whole nation made visible in one animal. Every falling number in every census, gathered up and held at the surface for the world to see. She is grief, or something near it, with a name and a face, and she is also, at the same time, plain arithmetic, the slow subtraction of a people, happening one calf at a time. In the end, both times, she let the calf go. After 17 days, in 2018, the body finally slipped from her and sank into the dark, and she swam on with her family. And in the weeks that followed, she seemed, to the people watching, to be herself again. The water closed over the place, the way it always does. And somewhere in that closing is the question this whole story has been circling from the very beginning, from a salmon balanced on a head, to a rudder shoved in slow circles off Spain, to a mother carrying her dead 1,000 miles. These animals keep breaking the surface of our world, doing things we feel we almost understand and then cannot quite. The boats were the first time most of us bothered to look. The question they left hanging, the question Tahlequah leaves hanging still, is what exactly it is that we have been looking at. Begin where we began. A young killer whale is moving through the Strait of Gibraltar at dusk, in the same water where this story started, doing the same strange thing, leaning its weight against the rudder of a passing boat in a game that means nothing and harms no one and will, in a season or a decade, be gone. Only now we are no longer baffled by it. We know, more or less, what we are watching, a fad, a thread of culture, the visible edge of a mind that builds traditions and hands them down and plays inside them in the cold dark entirely on its own terms. The boats were never an attack. They were a message we did not know how to read, and the message in the end came down to something very simple. We are here, it said, and we are not what you thought. So what becomes of them? This animal we are only now learning to see clearly. The honest answer comes in two parts, and they do not point the same way. As a species, the killer whale is in no danger whatsoever. It is one of the most successful predators the planet has ever produced, found in every ocean, from the ice at both poles to the warm water of the tropics, in dozens of distinct forms, tens of thousands of animals strong. The orca, in the broadest sense, will almost certainly outlast us. That is the first part of the answer, and it is the easy one. The second part is harder, and it is where everything we have learned comes due, because the killer whale is not really one thing, and never was. It is a scattering of separate peoples, each with its own language, its own food, its own hunting craft, its own hard-won knowledge of one particular stretch of sea. And some of those peoples are dying. The fish-eaters of the Pacific Northwest, the family we watched a grandmother lead and a mother carry her dead through, are down to 70-odd animals and falling, with a real chance of being gone within the lifetime of a child born this year. The boat tippers of the Strait of Gibraltar, the very whales whose game began all of this, number fewer than 40 and rank among the most endangered killer whales on Earth. And along the industrial coastlines of the world, where the old poison runs thickest, population after population is quietly failing. The species will live. Particular nations of it will not. And here is the thing the science of the last few decades has forced into the open, the thing that makes this a different kind of loss from the ones we are used to. When one of these populations goes under, we do not simply lose a number of animals, we lose a culture. We lose a dialect that no other whale on Earth speaks. We lose a set of hunting techniques worked out and refined across thousands of years, and a map of a particular ocean, which runs come when, which bays repay searching in a hungry season that exists nowhere but in the minds of its oldest members. We lose a way of being a killer whale that took 10,000 years to build and cannot, once it is gone, be built again. A species can sometimes be coaxed back from the edge, its numbers slowly rebuilt over generations. A culture cannot. When the last old female who knows the way dies with no one left to tell, the knowing dies with her, finally and for good. What is vanishing off these coasts is not only a kind of animal, it is a civilization, small, silent to us, almost entirely unrecognized, going extinct in real time. And remember what at least one of these peoples was on the verge of becoming. The fish-eaters of the Northwest were not just a culture. They were, as we saw, a species in the making, a new branch of the tree of life pushing slowly outward, kept apart from all the others by nothing but their own traditions, their genes drifting toward something genuinely new. To lose them now would be to lose not only what they are, but what they were on their way to becoming, a whole new kind of animal, pruned from the tree before it ever finished growing. It is not all darkness. We have at least begun to stop adding to the harm we can see most clearly. The age of the killer whale in a concrete tank is ending. The captures have stopped, the parks have given up breeding, and the last animals taken from the sea for our amusement are living out the close of a chapter that will not be written again. Rivers are being unblocked here and there. Quieter ships are being designed. The poison, banned at last, will thin from the water across the long, slow decades it takes such things to fade. None of it may prove enough, and none of it may arrive in time for the 74 or the 37. The likeliest future is a mixed one, the orca sailing on through every ocean for ages yet, while some of its oldest and most singular cultures slip away beneath us, unrecorded within our own lifetimes. We are, just barely, learning to see these animals clearly. We may have learned it a little too late to keep all of them. What then has this creature given us, beyond a mystery solved and a conscience pricked? Something larger and harder to put a name to. For almost the whole of our history, we believed that the things we prized most in ourselves, a mind that learns, a family that teaches, a culture that remembers and invents and passes itself along, were ours alone, the very line that set us above the rest of creation. The killer whale has quietly taken that belief apart. Here is an animal that wears useless fashions for a summer and then abandons them. That holds something we cannot help but read as funerals, that keeps its elders alive for the knowledge in their heads, that speaks in inherited accents and hunts by inherited craft, that has divided itself into nations separated by nothing but what their mothers taught them. None of it is human. All of it is culture. And it has been going on in the water just past our beaches for longer than there have been human beings to overlook it. That is the gift, if a creature so indifferent to us can be said to give one. It is not really a lesson about the ocean or a plea to do better, though we should. It is a correction to our oldest and proudest assumption, the discovery that we are not the only authors of meaning on this planet, not the only animals who hold a way of life in mind and hand it on. We have a neighbor. We have always had a neighbor, a great, dark, intelligent neighbor, living a life as rich and structured and storied as our own, in a medium we can barely enter by rules we are only beginning to guess at. The boats off Spain, for all the fright and the headlines, were an introduction. A clumsy one, easy to misread, but an introduction all the same to the second culture-bearing mind on Earth, which turns out to have been here the entire time. And that is the deepest thing the killer whale has to tell us, the thing worth carrying with us into the dark. There are two ways for life to hand something on to the future. One is the way we have always known, through the gene, the long, slow code, written and rewritten across millions of years, blind and patient, passing on what an animal is. But there is a second way, far younger and far swifter, the passing on, mind to mind, of what an animal has learned. A song, a skill, a custom, a way of seeing the world, handed from the old to the young inside a single lifetime, and altered and handed on again. For a long time we were certain that this second kind of inheritance was ours and ours alone, that it was in fact the thing that made us what we are. We were wrong. It has been running in the sea the whole time alongside the first, for hundreds of thousands of years. A second line of memory, carried not in the blood but in the mind, raising up cultures and losing them, and raising them again in the cold water beneath our hulls. We are not the only animals on this planet who hold a way of being in mind and pass it down and play inside it. We never were. There is another. There has always been another, just out of our sight, keeping its own long memory in the dark. So leave it where it began, out in the strait, with the young whale and the boat. The light is almost gone now. The game is winding down. The rudder is bent. The people are safe. The radio has fallen quiet. And the young orca, having had its fun, lets the boat go and turns and slips back down into the dark to find its family. But before it goes, there is the eye. It rolls up once, clear of the black water, and for a moment it takes in the boat above it, the hull, the rail, the pale row of faces looking down. We have spent this whole night trying to see into that eye. It is easy to forget at the end that the seeing has never run one way. The whale has been watching us too, and it has been watching far longer than we have troubled to watch it. That is the thing to carry down into sleep, not the monster of the headlines, not the victim of the documentaries. A mind, a vast old family-bound mind, out in the cold dark at this very moment, keeping its songs and its laws and its long memory, raising its young, carrying its dead, inventing useless and lovely new games, and aware of us in its quiet way from below, while we are only just beginning to notice it is there. The boat will mend. The story will be told again, and told a little better than we used to tell it. The sea will keep its secrets a while longer, and the families will go on moving through the dark, the old female out in front, the one who knows the way. They do not need us to watch them, they never did, but they have been watching us all the same, for a very long time. So rest now. The dark water is in good keeping, it always was. You can sleep. Good night.